I'm Imani Reddick, 23 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I believed family meant protection, that mothers would move mountains for their children's dreams. Then I found the charred remains of my Harvard acceptance letter in our kitchen. Trash can, and everything I thought I knew about love crumbled like ash between my fingers. The smell hit me first. Not the usual scent of fried catfish that clung to our trailer walls, but something acrid and bitter. Paper. Dreams burning. My hands shook as I pulled out the fragments, Harvard's crimson logo still visible on one corner. "Congratulations, Miss Reddick," barely legible on another piece. My mother's voice echoed from that morning. "Some dreams ain't meant for girls like us, baby." What she didn't know was that I had been working double shifts at Murphy's Diner for 2 years, saving every penny for application fees and textbooks. What she couldn't understand was that this letter represented 17 years of 4 a.m. study sessions and believing I could be more. But here's what makes this story unbelievable. How do you forgive the person who burned your future to keep you close? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The notebook sits on my desk now, 6 years later, its pages yellowed, and corners worn soft from handling. Back then, it was my secret companion, filled with scholarship essays written by the dim light of our kitchen table after everyone else had gone to sleep. The grease stains on the cover tell their own story, evidence of late nights when I'd rush from my shift at Murphy's Diner directly to homework, still smelling of fryer oil and broken dreams. I remember the weight of that notebook in my backpack as I walked through the halls of Baton Rouge High, past the peeling paint and broken lockers that seemed to whisper that kids like us weren't meant for places like Harvard. But I carried it anyway, filled with applications to 17 different colleges, each one representing a different version of the future I was desperate to claim. Our trailer sat at the end of Magnolia Court, where the asphalt gave way to red. Dirt and hope felt as fragile as the screen door that never quite closed right. Mama had painted the shutters yellow once, back when I was small enough to believe that color could change everything. Now they were faded to the color of old butter, chipped and weathered like everything else in our neighborhood. Darius was 11, then, all elbows and knees and questions that I didn't always have answers for. He'd sit cross-legged on my bed while I worked, comic books spread around him like a paper fortress, occasionally looking up to ask why I was always writing in that book. And when I was going to have time to watch cartoons with him again, "Imani's gonna be a lawyer," he'd tell anyone who'd listen, his gap-toothed grin splitting his face wide open. "She's gonna wear them fancy suits and everything." Mama would get that look whenever he said it, not angry exactly, but something sadder. Something that looked like fear dressed up as protection. She'd been 16 when she had me, 17 when she dropped out to work double shifts at the gas station to keep food on the table. Dreams, she'd learned, were luxuries that poor black girls from Louisiana couldn't afford. "Baby, you need to be realistic," she'd say, her voice gentle but firm. "Ain't nothing wrong with staying close to home. Plenty of good jobs here. You could work at the hospital, maybe get your CNA license, steady work, steady pay." But I'd already tasted something else. Ms. Choi had arrived at our school in the middle of my junior year, fresh from New York with her sharp suits and sharper expectations. She was Korean American, spoke 3 languages, and had the kind of confidence that made you sit up straighter just being in the same room as her. "Your writing has teeth," she told me after I turned in my first essay for her AP English class. "But you're pulling your punches. Stop apologizing for taking up space on the page." She stayed after school to help students like me, the ones who had potential but no roadmap. Her classroom became my sanctuary, a place where dreaming big wasn't seen as getting above yourself, but as finally reaching your potential. "Have you thought about applying to Ivy League schools?" she asked one afternoon as I was packing up my things. The question hung in the air like incense, sacred and impossible. "Schools like that aren't for people like me," I said, the words tasting bitter even as they left my mouth. Ms. Choi set down her red pen, the same one she used to mark up my essays with encouraging comments and challenging questions, and looked at me with the kind of intensity that made me want to hide and stand taller at the same time. People like what exactly? Smart people? Hardworking people? People who've overcome more obstacles by age 17 than most adults face in a lifetime? She pulled out a thick packet from her desk drawer, the Harvard application gleaming like a golden ticket. I've been teaching for 8 years, Imani. I've seen a lot of students with potential, but I've rarely seen someone with your combination of raw talent and lived experience. Harvard doesn't just want students who've had every advantage handed to them. They want students who can contribute something unique to their community. That night, I sat at our rickety kitchen table with the application spread before me, the overhead light casting everything in harsh fluorescent reality. Mama was working the night shift, and Darius was asleep on the couch, the TV still flickering with late-night cartoons. I started writing in my notebook, draft after draft of essays that tried to capture what it meant to grow up poor, but not broken, to have dreams that felt too big for your zip code but just right for your heart. I wrote about working at Murphy's Diner, how the regulars had become like family, how Mrs. Henderson always left an extra dollar tip when she knew I was saving for something special. I wrote about Darius, how he believed in me with the kind of faith that made me want to be worthy of it. I wrote about Mama, though more carefully, about how her sacrifices had given me the foundation to dream, even if she couldn't quite understand the dreams themselves. The essay questions felt like invitations to excavate my own life. Describe a challenge you've overcome. Tell us about a time when you stood up for something you believed in. What would you contribute to the Harvard community? Each question demanded honesty, the kind that made my chest tight and my hands shake. How do you explain what it's like to be 17 and feel the weight of your entire family's future on your shoulders? How do you articulate the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being perpetually caught between two worlds, the one you're from and the one you're trying to reach? By December, I had submitted applications to 17 schools, each one requiring its own essays, its own vision of who I might become. But Harvard felt different. Harvard felt like destiny wrapped in crimson and gold, like everything I'd been working toward finally had a name and an address. I kept the applications secret, checking the mailbox every day before anyone else got home, my heart hammering against my ribs every time I saw an official-looking envelope. Rejection letters came first, thin envelopes with polite language that basically amounted to, "Thanks, but no thanks." Each one stung, but they also felt expected somehow, like I'd been preparing for disappointment my whole life. But then, there were the acceptances. Louisiana State University offered me a partial scholarship. Tulane sent a thick packet with information about their honors program. Dillard University's acceptance letter came with a handwritten note from the admissions counselor. "We can't wait to see what you accomplish here." I hid them all in my notebook, pressed between pages of draft essays and scholarship applications like flowers I was saving for some special occasion. I told myself I was waiting for all the decisions before I shared the news, but the truth was more complicated than that. Mama's anxiety had been growing with each passing month. She'd find reasons to keep me home from school. A headache that needed tending, an extra shift at the diner that she'd somehow arranged for me, sudden concerns about the weather or the condition of my car. Nothing obvious enough to call her out on, but a pattern that felt like a slowly tightening net. "You've been different lately," she said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "Secretive. What's got you so preoccupied?" I almost told her then. The words were right there, begging to be shared. "I got into college, Mama. Multiple colleges. I have choices. I have a future." But something in her eyes stopped me. Something that looked like panic dressed up as maternal concern. "Just thinking." "About graduation," I said instead. "It's coming up fast." She nodded, but I could see the worry lines deepening around her eyes. "Well, don't go thinking too far ahead. One step at a time, baby. One step at a time." That's when I should have known. That's when I should have recognized the fear in her. voice for what it was. Not concern for my well-being, but terror at the thought of losing me. But I was 17 and drunk on possibility, convinced that love would eventually triumph over fear. I kept checking the mailbox. I kept writing in my notebook. I kept believing that Harvard would see in me what Ms. Choi saw, what I was just beginning to see in myself. And when that thick crimson envelope finally arrived on a Tuesday in March, my hand shook so badly I could barely open it. But there it was, in black and white, an impossible reality. Dear Miss Reddick, congratulations. You have been accepted to Harvard University's class of 2009. I must have read it 17 times, each reading making it feel more real and more impossible at the same time. Harvard University. Me. Imani Reddick, from trailer number 12 on Magnolia Court. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my notebook, already planning how I would tell everyone. I imagined Darius's reaction, his whoops of joy and demands to see the letter 100 times. I imagined Ms. Choi's proud smile, and the way she'd probably make me read the acceptance letter aloud to her other students, as proof that dreams weren't just for other people. I imagined Mama's face, the moment when surprise would give way to pride, when she'd realize that her daughter had just opened a door that had been locked for generations of our family. What I couldn't imagine, what never even occurred to me, was that she would choose to burn that door down rather than watch me walk through it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I know because Tuesdays were my short days at the diner, which meant I could get home before Mama and check the mail without having to explain why my hands were shaking or why I kept glancing toward the roadway like I was expecting something momentous. March in Louisiana has its own particular weight. Thick air that sits heavy on your skin and promises rain that may or may not come. The azaleas were blooming pink and white along Mrs. Henderson's fence, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the familiar sound of Tyree working on someone's car in his makeshift garage behind his grandmother's house. I'd been checking the mailbox religiously for weeks, my heart doing this painful stuttering thing every time I saw our metal box at the end of the driveway. Thin envelope meant rejection. Thick envelope meant possibility. But this envelope was different. Cream-colored paper that felt substantial between my fingers. Harvard University embossed in deep crimson letters across the corner. My hands were trembling so badly I had to sit down on the front steps of our trailer before I could open it. The envelope seemed to pulse with potential, like it contained not just words on paper but an entirely different version of my life. Dear Miss Reddick, it began. And I had to stop reading because the world tilted sideways, and I couldn't quite catch my breath. Congratulations. You have been accepted to Harvard University's class of 2009. The rest of the letter blurred together through my tears. Information about housing and orientation and financial aid. Practical details that suddenly seemed secondary to the impossible reality that they wanted me. Harvard wanted me. I read it again, slower this time, letting each word sink in like stones dropping into still water. Full need-based scholarship. Housing included. Books covered. It wasn't just acceptance. It was a complete transformation of everything I thought possible for my life. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, just holding the letter and watching the sun filter through the live oak trees that lined our street. Everything looked the same, but felt fundamentally different, like I was seeing the world through new eyes that had just learned how to hope properly. When I finally went inside, I found Darius sprawled on the living room floor, working on a jigsaw puzzle of the solar system that he'd gotten for his birthday. He looked up when I walked in, notebook clutched against my chest like armor. You look weird, he said, with the brutal honesty that only 11-year-old brothers can manage. Like you seen a ghost or something. Maybe I did, I said. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to my toes. I wanted to tell him right then, wanted to spread the letter out on the coffee table and watch his eyes go wide with amazement. But something held me back. Maybe superstition, maybe the feeling that speaking the news aloud would somehow make it less real, more fragile. Instead, I helped him with his puzzle, fitting pieces of Jupiter's great red spot into place while my mind raced with plans and possibilities. Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard Yard. Libraries that held more books than I could read in a lifetime. Professors who were famous for their research, their writing, their ability to change the world through ideas. Imani? Darius looked up from the puzzle, his expression suddenly serious. You gonna leave us when you graduate? The question hit me like a physical blow, unexpected and sharp. What makes you ask that? He shrugged, but I could see the worry in his dark eyes. Mama been talking about how families need to stick together, how people who leave home sometimes don't come back. I set down the puzzle piece I'd been holding and really looked at my little brother, at the way his shoulders hunched slightly when he was worried, at the gap between his front teeth that made him whistle when he talked fast, at the constellation of freckles across his nose that he'd inherited from our father, whoever he was. Darius, I said carefully. What if I told you that sometimes people have to leave home to become the person they're supposed to be? That doesn't mean they stop loving their family. But what if they forget? I could never forget you, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. You're part of me, little brother. Distance can't change that. He seemed to consider this, fitting another piece of Saturn's rings into place. Mama don't see it that way. A chill ran down my spine, despite the warm afternoon. What do you mean? She'd been asking me things, about what you've been writing in that notebook, about whether you've been getting mail. She seemed scared about something. I felt my stomach drop. Scared about what? About you changing, about you wanting things we can't give you. The front door slammed then, and we both jumped. Mama was home early from her shift at the nursing home, her scrubs wrinkled and her hair pulled back in the tight bun she wore when she was stressed. Hey, babies, she called, but her voice had an edge to it that made me instinctively close my notebook. Y'all been good today? Imani been acting weird, Darius announced helpfully. She got that same look she gets when she aces a test or something. Mama's eyes sharpened, focusing on my face with laser intensity. That's so? What you got to be so happy about? I felt the acceptance letter burning in my notebook like a live coal, demanding to be shared, demanding to be celebrated. This was supposed to be the moment, the triumphant revelation that would prove to Mama that all my dreams weren't just foolish fantasies, but real, achievable goals. Just had a good day at school, I said instead, hating myself for the lie. She studied my face for a long moment, then glanced down at my notebook. What you always writing in that thing anyway? Seems like every time I see you, you got your nose buried in them pages. Just homework stuff. College applications. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mama's face went carefully blank, the way it did when she was trying to control her emotions. I thought we talked about that, she said quietly. About being realistic. I am being realistic, Mama. I'm applying to schools I can actually afford. What you can afford and what you should do ain't always the same thing, baby. She moved closer, and I could smell the familiar combination of disinfectant and exhaustion that always clung to her after work. You got responsibilities here, to this family, to Darius. I felt something cold and sharp twist in my stomach. What's that supposed to mean? It means some people got the luxury of chasing dreams, and some people got the responsibility of taking care of the people they love. Her voice was getting that tight quality it got when she was building toward an argument. It means maybe it's time you started thinking about what's best for everyone, not just yourself. Getting an education benefits everyone, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Better job, better money, better life for all of us. Better life somewhere else, you mean. The words came out harsh and accusatory. Better life with better people, who didn't raise you up from nothing. That's not what I meant, and you know it. But she was already walking away, her footsteps heavy on the thin carpet. "Dinner in an hour," she called over her shoulder. "And put that notebook away. Family. Time means family time." I sat there for a long moment, my hands shaking again, but for entirely different reasons. Darius had gone back to his puzzle, but I could see the tension in his small shoulders. The way he always retreated into himself when Mama and I started dancing around the edges of a fight. That night, I lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of our trailer settling around me. The hum of the refrigerator, the whistle of wind through the gap under the front door, the distant sound of trains passing through the rail yard 2 miles away. Somewhere in the darkness, Mama was awake too. I could tell by the quality of her breathing, by the way she shifted restlessly in her bed. I wanted to go to her, wanted to spread the Harvard letter out on her comforter and show her what her daughter had accomplished. I wanted to see pride, replace the fear in her eyes, wanted to prove that loving me didn't have to mean holding me back. But something in her voice earlier had stopped me cold, something that sounded less like concern and more like desperation, something that made me understand for the first time that the woman who had raised me might not want me to succeed if success meant leaving her behind. I hid the letter deep in my notebook that night, pressed between pages of draft essays and scholarship applications like a secret too dangerous to share. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, for Mama to be in a better mood, for the perfect words that would help her understand. What I didn't know was that she'd already been checking the mail herself, intercepting correspondence from colleges before I could see it. What I didn't know was that my success felt like abandonment to her, that every achievement was another step toward a life that didn't include her. What I didn't know was that love, when it's rooted in fear and trauma, can become the very thing that destroys what it's trying to protect. 3 days later, I came home from my shift at the diner to find the house unusually quiet. Darius was at his friend's house, and Mama was standing in the kitchen with her back to me, staring out the window at nothing. "Mama, you okay?" She turned around slowly, and something in her expression made my blood run cold. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, like she'd been crying, but her jaw was set with the kind of determination that usually meant trouble. "We need to talk," she said. I set down my backpack, suddenly hyper-aware of the notebook inside it, of the letter hidden within its pages like evidence of a crime I hadn't meant to commit. About what? About this foolishness that's got you so twisted up. About these ideas somebody's been putting in your head about who you're supposed to be. My heart started hammering against my ribs. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me, Imani." Her voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. "I raised you better than that. I know when something's eating at you, and I know it's got something to do with that teacher of yours and all this college nonsense." "It's not nonsense, Mama. It's my future." "Your future is here," she said, stepping closer. "With your family, with the people who love you enough to keep you safe." "Safe from what? From having opportunities? From building a better life?" "Safe from disappointment." The words exploded out of her like they'd been building pressure for weeks. "Safe from setting yourself up to fail. Safe from becoming someone who thinks she's too good for where she came from." The accusation hung between us like a living thing, ugly and sharp-toothed. I felt tears burning behind my eyes but refused to let them fall. "I would never think that," I whispered. "Maybe not now," she said, and her voice had gone soft again, which somehow made it worse. "But what about after a year of being around all them rich kids? What about when you realize you don't fit in their world? But you don't fit in ours anymore either? That won't happen." "It happens, baby. It happens all the time. I seen it before." She was looking at me with such sadness, such certainty, that for a moment I almost believed her. People leave home thinking they're gonna conquer the world, and they come back broken and angry, blaming everyone else for not being enough. "I'm not leaving you, Mama. I'm just going to school." "Same thing," she said. "Same damn thing." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her words, about the fear in her voice, about the way she'd looked at me like I was already gone. Part of me wanted to march into her room and show her the Harvard letter, to prove that I was worthy of the opportunity, that this wasn't some impossible fantasy but a real chance at a real future. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But another part of me was starting to understand something terrible, that no amount of proof would be enough. That Mama's fear wasn't really about my ability to succeed, but about her own inability to imagine a life without me in it. I got up and checked my notebook, running my fingers over the hidden letter like a talisman. It was still there, still real, still offering me a life I could barely dare to dream of. I just had to figure out how to claim it without destroying the people I loved in the process. But I was 17, and I still believed that love and logic could coexist, that the right word said at the right time could bridge any gap. I had no idea that in 3 days, I would come home to find my future burning in the kitchen trash can, reduced to ash and regret by the woman who had given me life but couldn't bear to let me live it. The morning I found the letter was Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were my favorite day of the week. Early release from school, which meant I could pick up an extra shift at Murphy's and still have time to work on scholarship essays before dinner. I'd been humming while I got dressed, thinking about the Harvard acceptance letter hidden in my notebook and planning how I would finally tell Mama about it over the weekend. Maybe I'd make her favorite dinner, smothered pork chops with rice and gravy, and wait until Darius was in bed before sitting her down for a real conversation. I'd show her the letter, explain the financial aid package, help her understand that this wasn't about leaving her behind, but about building something better for all of us. I was still humming when I walked into the kitchen to grab a piece of toast before school. The morning light was streaming through our thin curtains, casting everything in a golden glow that made even our old appliances look somehow precious. Mama had already left for her early shift, and Darius was still asleep, which meant I had the house to myself for these quiet few minutes. That's when I smelled it. At first, I thought maybe Mama had burned something on the stove. She'd been distracted, lately, preoccupied with worries she wouldn't name, but this smell was different, sharper, more deliberate. I followed the acrid scent to the trash can beside the sink, and my world tilted off its axis. There, nestled among coffee grounds and yesterday's dinner scraps, were the charred remains of paper. Cream-colored paper with crimson letterhead, paper that I recognized with a sick, swooping certainty that made my knees weak and my vision blur around the edges. My hands were shaking as I reached into the trash, pulling out fragments that crumbled at my touch. Harvard University on one piece. "Congratulations, Miss Red," on another. The rest was ash and char and the complete obliteration of everything I'd been working toward. I must have made some kind of sound, a gasp or a cry or something wordless and raw, because suddenly Darius was standing in the doorway in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Imani, what's wrong? You look like you're gonna throw up." I couldn't speak, couldn't form words around the massive thing lodged in my throat that felt like grief and rage and betrayal, all twisted together into something too big for my body to contain. I just sat there on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the ashes of my future, trying to understand how the person who loved me most in the world could have done something so devastating. "Imani!" Darius's voice was getting higher, more worried. "What's all that stuff? What happened?" I looked up at my little brother, at his concerned face and his gap-toothed frown, and tried to find words that would make sense of the senseless. "Mama burned something that was important to me," I finally managed. Why would she do that? The question echoed in my head like a prayer I didn't know how to answer. Why would she do that? How could she do that? I gathered up the paper fragments, holding them like the sacred relics they'd become. Evidence of a crime I still couldn't quite believe had been committed. Proof that love, when it was scared enough, could become indistinguishable from violence. "I don't know, baby," I whispered. "I really don't know." School that day was a blur of motion without meaning. I sat through first period English, staring at Ms. Choi as she discussed literary themes, of betrayal and redemption, her words washing over me like water. She kept glancing in my direction, her sharp eyes noting the way I was clutching my notebook like a life preserver, the way I jumped every time someone spoke to me. "Miss Reddick," she said after class, as other students filed out for second period. "A word?" I wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the crowded hallways and pretend that this conversation wasn't about to happen. But my feet carried me to her desk anyway, where she was organizing papers with the same red pen she always used, the one that had marked up so many of my essays with encouraging comments and challenging questions. "You look like someone ran over. Your dog," she said, setting down the pen and giving me her full attention. "What's going on?" I opened my mouth to lie, to make up some story about being tired or stressed about graduation or worried about prom plans. But what came out instead was the truth, raw and jagged and desperate. My mother burned my Harvard acceptance letter. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and real at the same time. Ms. Choi's expression didn't change immediately. She was too good a teacher for that, too practiced at receiving devastating news from teenagers who thought the world was ending. But I saw something flicker behind her eyes, something that looked like fury. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "Could you repeat that?" "I got into Harvard," I said, and even saying it out loud felt like an act of rebellion. "Full scholarship. Everything covered." The letter came on Tuesday, and I was going to tell her this weekend. But when I got up this morning, I found it in the trash. Burned. Ms. Choi was quiet for a long moment, her hands very still on her desk. When she finally spoke, her voice was controlled but tight. "Are you certain it was your mother who destroyed it?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "And you're certain it was the Harvard acceptance?" Another nod. She picked up her red pen, clicked it once, then set it down again. I'd never seen her look so angry and so sad at the same time. "Imani," she said finally, "I need you to understand something. What happened to you this morning isn't just disappointing or frustrating. It's a form of sabotage. It's someone who claims to love you actively, working to limit your opportunities." The words hit me like physical blows. Sabotage. The idea that Mama had deliberately, consciously chosen to destroy my future felt too big and too terrible to accept. "She's scared," I said, surprised by how small my voice sounded. "She doesn't want to lose me." "Fear doesn't excuse this," Ms. Choi said firmly. "Love doesn't excuse this. There is no excuse for what she did." I felt tears starting to gather behind my eyes, hot and shameful. What am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to go home and look at her? How am I supposed to trust her ever again? Ms. Choi leaned forward, her expression shifting from anger to something fiercer, more determined. "You're going to reapply," she said. "What?" "You're going to reapply to Harvard. Today. This afternoon. We're going to call the admissions office, explain what happened, and ask for an extension on your response deadline." I stared at her, feeling like she was speaking a foreign language. "But the letter is gone. I don't have any proof that I was accepted." "You have me," she said simply. "You have your transcripts, your test scores, your essay drafts. You have a teacher who will vouch for your character and your potential. Most importantly, you have a story now that you didn't have before." "A story?" She picked up her red pen again, this time with purpose. "You're going to write a new essay, Imani, about what it means to have your dreams destroyed by the person closest to you, about what it takes to rebuild from ashes, about the kind of strength it requires to forgive betrayal without accepting defeat." I felt something stir in my chest, something that might have been hope if hope wasn't such a dangerous thing to feel. Right then. You think they'll believe me? I think they'll see exactly what I see, she said. A young woman who has already overcome more obstacles than most adults face in a lifetime. Someone who deserves every opportunity she can create for herself. The bell rang then, signaling the start of second period, but neither of us moved. What about my mother? I asked. What am I supposed to do about her? Ms. Choi's expression softened, slightly. You're going to have to decide whether you want to be a daughter or a woman today, Imani. Whether you want to spend your life making other people comfortable with your smallness, or whether you want to claim the space you deserve in this world. Those don't have to be mutually exclusive. No, she agreed. They don't. But sometimes love requires tough choices. Sometimes protecting yourself is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved. I thought about Darius then, about his faith in me, and his fear that I would leave and never come back. I thought about Mama, about the way she'd looked at me with such desperate sadness, such bone-deep terror at the thought of being left behind. I thought about the woman I wanted to become, and the woman I was afraid I was settling for. If I do this, I said slowly, if I reapply and somehow get accepted again, there's no going back. She'll never forgive me. Maybe not, Ms. Choi said. But will you forgive yourself if you don't try? That afternoon, we called Harvard's admissions office from Ms. Choi's classroom. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number, my heart hammering against my ribs as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Harvard University admissions. This is Jennifer speaking. Hi, I said, my voice coming out smaller than I'd intended. I need to report a situation regarding my acceptance letter. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. Explaining to a stranger that my mother had destroyed my Harvard acceptance letter felt like confessing to a crime I hadn't committed. But Jennifer was patient and professional, taking notes as I spoke and asking follow-up questions that made the whole thing feel slightly less insane. I've never encountered this exact situation before, she admitted, but we can certainly work with you on a solution. Can you have your guidance counselor call us with verification of your acceptance? We'll need to confirm the details before we can issue a replacement letter. Ms. Choi took the phone then, her voice crisp and authoritative as she vouched for me and my story. Listening to her describe me to the admissions officer, exceptional student, remarkable resilience, tremendous potential, made me sit up straighter in my chair. When she hung up, her expression was cautiously optimistic. They're going to extend your response deadline by 2 weeks, she said. That gives us time to put together a new application packet, including an updated essay that addresses what you've been through. What if they change their minds? What if they decide I'm too much trouble? Then we apply to other schools. But, Imani, I don't think that's going to happen. Your story is compelling precisely because it's authentic. Admissions committees see a lot of essays about overcoming adversity, but they rarely see someone who's overcome adversity from their own family. She handed me a blank piece of paper and her red pen. Start writing, she said. Tell them what happened. Tell them how it felt. Tell them who you're choosing to become despite it all. I stared at the blank page for a long moment, then began to write. I am the daughter of a woman who burned my Harvard acceptance letter because she was afraid of losing me to a dream she couldn't understand. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. I wrote about growing up, poor but not broken, about working double shifts to pay for application fees, about the moment I'd held that first acceptance letter and felt like I could touch the stars. I wrote about finding the ashes in the trash can, about the way betrayal tastes like copper and grief, about the choice between being a grateful daughter and a complete woman. I wrote about forgiveness and fury, about love that protects and love that destroys, about the difference between holding someone close and holding them back. When I finished, 3 hours later, Ms. Choi read it silently, her red pen untouched on the desk between us. "This is the best thing you've ever written," she said finally. "It's raw and honest and completely heartbreaking. It's also hopeful in a way that's going to make admissions committees remember why they got into this work in the first place." Felt a flicker of something that might have been pride, if pride wasn't such a luxury I couldn't afford. What happens now? Now we submit the application and wait. But Imani, I want you to understand something important. Whether or not Harvard accepts you again, you've already won something today. What's that? You've chosen yourself, she said. You've decided that your dreams matter, even when the people closest to you disagree. That's not a small thing. That's everything. Walking home that evening, I felt like I was carrying dynamite in my backpack. The new application, the essay, the choice I'd made to fight for my future, instead of accepting its destruction. All of it felt dangerous and necessary, and terrifying. I knew that telling Mama what I'd done would be like setting off an explosion in our little trailer. I knew that she would see my reapplication as the ultimate betrayal, proof that I valued my dreams more than her feelings. But I also knew that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. I couldn't look at Darius in 20 years and explain why I'd given up on the life I was meant to live because someone else was afraid of it. Love, I was learning, wasn't always about sacrifice. Sometimes it was about having the courage to become who you were meant to be, even when it broke other people's hearts, even when it broke your own. The revelation came 3 weeks after I'd resubmitted my Harvard application on a Saturday morning, when Mama thought I was working an extra shift at Murphy's. Instead, I was at the parish records office with Ms. Choi, armed with Mama's full name and birth date, trying to understand the woman who had raised me by examining the official documents of her past. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Ms. Choi asked as we climbed the concrete steps of the administrative building. Sometimes learning someone's history changes how you see them. Once you know, you can't unknow. I thought about the ashes of my acceptance letter, about the way Mama's hands had shaken when she told me that some dreams weren't meant for girls like us, about the fear in her eyes that looked less like concern and more like panic. "I need to understand," I said. "I need to know why." The records office smelled like old paper and bureaucratic patience. The clerk behind the counter was a tired-looking woman, with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, the kind of person who'd seen every possible human drama reduced to forms and filing systems. "Loretta Marie Washington, born April 15, 1964, I said, sliding the request form across the counter. "I need her educational records and any birth certificates for children." "Relationship to the subject?" "Daughter." She stamped the form with the kind of authority that comes from decades of routine. "Processing fee is $25. Records will be ready in an hour." We waited at a coffee shop across the street, Ms. Choi grading papers while I stared out the window and tried to prepare myself for whatever truth we were about to uncover. Part of me already knew it would be bad. You don't burn your daughter's future unless your own past is full of ashes. When we returned, the clerk handed me a manila envelope thick enough to contain an entire life's worth of documentation. I waited until we were in Ms. Choi's car before opening it, my hands steady despite the thundering of my heart. The first document was Mama's birth certificate, confirming what I already knew. Born in rural Louisiana to parents I'd never met and whose names I'd never heard spoken aloud, James Washington and Mary Louise Washington, both listed as farm laborers. The second document made my stomach drop. Loretta Marie Washington had enrolled in high school in September 1979. She'd been an honor roll student her freshman year, with grades that mirrored my own. A's in English and history, B's in math and science. But her transcript ended abruptly in March 1980 with a notation in red ink, "Withdrawn, family emergency." She'd been 15 years old. "There's more," Ms. Choi said quietly, reading over my shoulder. The next document was a birth certificate, dated November 12, 1980. "Baby girl Washington, born to Loretta Marie Washington, age 16. Father unknown, Imani Reddick, my birth certificate. I stared at the paper, trying to process what I was reading. Mama had been 16 when she had me, which I'd known. But what I hadn't known was that she'd dropped out of school when she was pregnant, that her education had ended at 15 to become my beginning. "Keep reading," Ms. Choi said gently. There was another birth certificate, dated September 3, 1983. Darius Michael Reddick, born to Loretta Marie Washington, age 19. Father unknown, but tucked behind Darius's birth certificate was something that made my hands start shaking again. A scholarship application from 1979, filled out in Mama's careful handwriting. Louisiana State University Early Admission Program. Academic Excellence Scholarship. A full ride based on her grades, and a personal essay about wanting to become a teacher. The application was stamped "Accepted" in red letters across the top. "Oh my God," I whispered. Ms. Choi was reading the scholarship letter that accompanied the application, her expression growing more grim with each paragraph. "She got in," she said. "Full scholarship to LSU. She was supposed to start in fall 1980, right after she graduated high school early. She was going to study education. I felt like I was drowning in understanding. Mama hadn't just been afraid of me leaving. She'd been afraid of me succeeding where she had failed. She'd been 15 and pregnant and forced to choose between her dreams and her child. She'd chosen me, and in doing so, had given up the exact future I was now trying to claim." "There's more," Ms. Choi said, pulling out another document. It was a letter from LSU, dated December 1980, formal and devastating in its bureaucratic politeness. "Due to your failure to enroll in fall courses and your lack of communication regarding your status, your scholarship has been revoked. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." The rest of the documents painted a picture of a life that had spiraled quickly from promise to survival. Employment records showing a series of minimum wage jobs: gas station attendant, diner waitress, nursing home aide. Each job listed a starting date, but no education requirements beyond a high school diploma she'd never earned. There was a GED certificate from 1995, earned when I was 14 and Darius was 11. She'd gone back to school in her 30s, studying for her high school equivalency while working full-time and raising 2 children. The final document in the folder was a letter from Delgado Community College, dated 1998. Mama had applied for their nursing program, had been accepted based on her GED scores and work experience. But there was another red stamp across the application. "Withdrawn, unable to secure childcare." I sat in Ms. Choi's car for a long time, staring at the evidence of my mother's truncated dreams. She'd been smart enough for early admission to college. She'd been motivated enough to earn her GED after 15 years. She'd been dedicated enough to apply for nursing school even with 2 children to support. But every time she'd reached for something better, life had pulled her back down. Every time she'd tried to climb out of the hole that poverty had dug for our family, something had forced her to choose between her dreams and her responsibilities. And now I was threatening to do what she'd never been able to do. I was threatening to escape. "She sees you as the reason she never made it out," Ms. Choi said quietly. "And she's terrified that you leaving means you'll realize she was right to blame you." "But I never blamed her," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I never asked her to sacrifice her dreams for me. You didn't have to ask. You just had to exist." The drive home was silent, both of us lost in the weight of what we'd discovered. I kept thinking about 15-year-old Mama, pregnant and afraid, and watching her scholarship slip away like sand through her fingers. I thought about 19-year-old Mama, trying to apply for nursing school while working full-time and raising 2 small children alone. I thought about the woman she might have been. Teacher Loretta, with her own classroom and her own students, helping kids like me believe in futures they could barely imagine. The woman who'd been buried under years of compromise and survival, and the kind of love that slowly transforms into resentment. When I got home, Mama was in the kitchen making dinner, humming an old gospel song while she stirred a pot of red beans and rice. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment I saw her differently, not just as my mother, but as someone who'd once been 17 and full of dreams that had been systematically crushed by circumstance and responsibility. "You're home early," she said. "Thought you were working until 6. "Shift got canceled," I lied, setting my backpack down carefully. The envelope of documents felt like evidence of a crime I wasn't sure I was ready to prosecute. "Well, good. Means you can help me with dinner. Darius been asking for cornbread all week." We worked together in comfortable silence, me mixing cornbread batter while she seasoned the beans. This was the rhythm we'd had for years. Domestic routines that felt like love when they weren't complicated by dreams and disappointments. "Mama," I said finally, not looking up from the mixing bowl. "Can I ask you something?" "Course, baby. What did you want to be when you were my age?" Her stirring slowed, then stopped entirely. I could feel her looking at me, trying to determine whether this was a casual question or something more loaded. "What kind of question is that?" "Just curious. You never talk about when you were young." She resumed stirring, but her movements were more deliberate now, more careful. "When you're young, you think about all kinds of foolish things," she said. "Then you grow up and realize that thinking and doing are two different animals entirely. But what did you think about? What did you want?" A long pause, the sound of the spoon against the pot, the distant hum of the refrigerator. Somewhere outside, a dog was barking. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said finally, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "Thought I was going to change the world, one classroom at a time. Stupid, really." "That's not stupid. That's beautiful." She turned to face me then, her expression guarded. "Beautiful don't pay bills, Imani. Beautiful don't keep food on the table or clothes on your children's backs. Beautiful is a luxury I never could afford." I wanted to tell her about the documents then, about the scholarship she'd won, and the nursing program she'd been accepted to. I wanted her to know that I understood why she'd burned my letter, that her fear made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of her own lost opportunities. But I also wanted her to understand that her sacrifices didn't have to become my limitations. That breaking the cycle of deferred dreams wasn't the same as rejecting the woman who'd made those sacrifices. "Maybe beautiful is something we create for each other," I said instead. "Maybe your dreams don't have to die just because they got delayed." She studied my face for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide whether to trust this conversation or retreat back into the safety of practical concerns. "Dreams have expiration dates, baby," she said finally. "Mine expired a long time ago. What if they didn't? What if it's never too late to stop?" The word came out sharp and final. "Just stop right there. I don't need you feeling sorry for me or trying to fix what ain't broken. I made my choices and I'm proud of the life they gave me, proud of the children they gave me." But I could see something fragile behind her defensive words, something that looked like grief dressed up as acceptance. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the invisible inheritance that had been passed down to me. Not just Mama's love and sacrifice, but her fear and disappointment, and the weight of dreams that had been crushed before they could fully form. I thought about the woman she'd been at 15, smart enough for early admission and hopeful enough to apply for scholarships. I thought about the woman she might have become, and the woman she'd had to become instead. I thought about forgiveness, and whether it was possible to forgive someone for trying to save you from their own fate. 3 days later, my phone rang. During lunch period. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer anyway. "Is this Imani Reddick?" "Yes, ma'am." This is Dean Stone from Harvard University. I'm calling about your updated application. My heart stopped beating for a moment, then started again at double speed. Yes, ma'am. Miss Reddick, I want you to know that in 30 years of admissions work, I've never encountered a situation quite like yours. Your essay about overcoming family sabotage was extraordinary, raw, honest, and remarkably mature. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but wait for whatever was coming next. I'm pleased to inform you that not only are we honoring your original acceptance, but we're also awarding you our Robinson Scholarship for Exceptional Resilience. That's an additional $5,000 per year for personal expenses and summer research opportunities. The world tilted, sideways. Everything became very bright and very distant. Miss Reddick, are you there? Yes, ma'am, I managed. I'm here. Thank you. Thank you so much. You should be proud of yourself, young lady, not just for your academic achievements, but for your courage. What you've overcome to get here is remarkable. When I hung up, I sat in the empty hallway outside the cafeteria and cried for 10 minutes straight. Not just from relief or joy, but from the overwhelming weight of finally having proof that my dreams were bigger than other people's fears. I was going to Harvard, despite everything, because of everything. Now I just had to figure out how to tell the woman who'd tried to prevent it from happening that she'd failed. And somehow, I had to find a way to make that conversation feel like forgiveness instead of betrayal. The call from Harvard came on a Wednesday, during the lunch period when I usually spent time in Ms. Choi's classroom, working on essays for other scholarship applications. I'd been in survival mode for 3 weeks since resubmitting my application, trying not to think about what would happen if they decided I was too much trouble, too complicated, too much of a risk. My phone vibrated against my leg during third period chemistry, and when I saw the unknown number with a Massachusetts area code, my heart started doing that painful stuttering thing again. But I couldn't answer during class, couldn't risk Mr. Peterson taking my phone away when this call might determine the entire trajectory of my life. So I sat through 45 minutes of molecular structures and chemical equations, checking my phone every 30 seconds to make sure I hadn't somehow missed a voicemail. When the bell finally rang, I practically ran to the nearest bathroom stall and called the number back with shaking fingers. Harvard University Office of Admissions, this is Dean Stone. The name hit me like lightning. Dean Stone wasn't just any admissions officer, she was the dean. The woman whose signature appeared on acceptance letters. The person who made final decisions about borderline cases and exceptional circumstances. This is Imani Reddick, I said, proud that my voice came out steadier than I felt. I believe you called me? Miss Reddick, yes. Thank you for calling back so promptly. I'm calling personally because your situation has been the subject of considerable discussion in our office. My stomach dropped. Considerable discussion wasn't good. Considerable discussion meant complications and second-guessing, and administrators wondering if accepting a student whose own mother had sabotaged her education was worth the potential drama. I understand, I said, though I didn't understand anything except that I was about to lose my second chance at the only thing I'd ever wanted. Miss Reddick, in 30 years of admissions work, I have never encountered a situation quite like yours. When Ms. Choi contacted us about your circumstances, my initial reaction was skepticism. Family sabotage, while not unheard of, is difficult to verify and even more difficult to address appropriately. I closed my eyes, leaning against the bathroom stall door for support. However, she continued, your updated essay was extraordinary, raw, honest, and remarkably mature. It demonstrated not only exceptional writing ability, but also the kind of emotional intelligence and resilience that we value most highly in our incoming class. Wait, was this going in a different direction than I'd thought? Furthermore, we contacted your teachers and guidance counselor for additional references. The picture they painted of your character, your work ethic, and your potential was unanimous and compelling. Ma'am, I interrupted, unable to bear the suspense any longer. Are you telling me that I'm still accepted? Miss Reddick, Dean Stone said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Not only are we honoring your original acceptance to Harvard University's class of 2009, but we are also awarding you our Robinson Scholarship for Exceptional Resilience. That's an additional $5,000 per year for personal expenses and summer research opportunities. The bathroom stall seemed to spin around me. I sat down hard on the closed toilet seat, trying to process what I'd just heard. I'm sorry, I said stupidly. Could you repeat that? You've been awarded the Robinson Scholarship, Miss Reddick. It's given to students who have demonstrated extraordinary perseverance in the face of significant obstacles. Your essay about overcoming family betrayal while maintaining your academic goals was exactly the kind of story this scholarship was created to honor. I started crying then, big, ugly sobs that echoed off the bathroom tiles. 5 years of working double shifts and hiding scholarship applications and believing that I could somehow transcend the limitations of my zip code had just been validated by the most prestigious university in the world. Miss Reddick, are you all right? Yes, ma'am, I managed through the tears. I can't believe this is real. It's very real. You should be extraordinarily proud of yourself. Not just for your academic achievements, but for your courage. What you've overcome to get here is remarkable. When I finally hung up, I sat in that bathroom stall for another 10 minutes, just breathing and trying to accept that this impossible thing had actually happened. I was going to Harvard, with a scholarship that would cover not just tuition and housing, but also personal expenses and research opportunities. I was going to Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was going to walk through Harvard Yard and attend lectures by professors whose names I'd only seen in textbooks. I was going to live in a dormitory and eat in dining halls and study in libraries that held more books than I could read in 10 lifetimes. I was going to become the person I'd always dreamed of being. But first, I had to tell the woman who'd tried to prevent it from happening. I found Ms. Choi in her classroom during lunch, grading essays with her ever-present red pen. She looked up when I knocked on her doorframe, and something in my expression must have given away the news because she set down her pen immediately. Harvard called, I said. And I got the Robinson Scholarship. Ms. Choi's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, joy, pride, and something that looked like fierce satisfaction. She stood up so quickly that she knocked over her coffee mug, sending liquid cascading across her desk. The Robinson Scholarship, she repeated, ignoring the coffee spreading toward her papers. Imani, do you understand what that means? That's not just a scholarship. That's recognition that you're exceptional. That's Harvard saying they don't just want you, they're investing in you. $5,000 a year, I said, still unable to quite believe it. For 4 years, plus research opportunities, plus the recognition that comes with being a Robinson Scholar. She was beaming now, her professional composure completely abandoned. Imani, this is extraordinary. This is life-changing. I know, I said, and suddenly I was crying again, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. Ms. Choi came around her desk and hugged me, something she'd never done before but which felt completely natural in that moment. I am so proud of you, she said, not just for getting the scholarship, but for fighting for yourself, for refusing to let someone else's fear determine your future. I have to tell my family, I said when we finally broke apart. Her expression grew more serious. How do you think your mother will react? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me thinks she'll be proud deep down, but part of me thinks this is going to break something between us that can't be fixed. Maybe, Ms. Choi said, carefully. But Imani, you can't live your life trying to manage other people's emotions. You can't make yourself smaller to make other people more comfortable. She's my mother. Yes, she is. And she loves you. But love without respect isn't enough. Love that requires you to limit yourself isn't healthy for anyone involved. I thought. About the documents we'd found at the parish records office. About Mama's lost scholarship and truncated dreams. I thought about the woman she might have been and the woman she'd had to become instead. What if I'm just being selfish? What if I'm choosing my dreams over my family? You're not choosing your dreams over your family, Ms. Choi said firmly. You're choosing your dreams alongside your family. There's a difference. Your success doesn't diminish them. It elevates all of you. Tell that to my mother. Maybe I will, she said, and something in her tone made me look at her more closely. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time someone had a conversation with your mother about what she's really afraid of, about what she's really doing to you. The idea of Ms. Choi confronting Mama made my stomach clench with anxiety. Please don't. That would just make everything worse. Would it? Or would it force an honest conversation that should have happened years ago? I didn't have an answer for that. All I knew was that I had approximately 4 hours before I had to go home and figure out how to tell my family that I'd gotten everything I'd ever wanted, despite my mother's best efforts to prevent it. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of congratulations and disbelief. Word had spread somehow, maybe through Ms. Choi, or maybe through the general telepathy that exists in small high schools, and teachers and classmates kept stopping me in the hallways to shake my hand or pat my back. Harvard, Mrs. Martinez, from the counseling office said, shaking her head in amazement. From Baton Rouge to Harvard. That's something special, honey. Robinson Scholarship, added Mr. Thomas, my AP history teacher. I looked it up during my planning period. They only give out 12 of those a year, across all departments. You're not just going to Harvard, Imani. You're going as one of their most valued incoming students. By the time school ended, I felt like I was walking on air and drowning in quicksand at the same time. Everyone around me was treating this like an unqualified victory. But all I could think about was the look on Mama's face when I told her that I'd gone behind her back, reapplied to the school she'd tried to prevent me from attending, and won a scholarship that would take me even further from home than she'd feared. I drove home slowly, taking the long way past the railroad tracks and the abandoned shopping center where I'd learned to drive 3 years earlier. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but I felt fundamentally different, like I'd been transformed at the cellular level by a single phone call. Our trailer looked smaller somehow, more fragile, like something that belonged to a past version of myself that I was already outgrowing. The yellow shutters that Mama had painted when I was small seemed faded and tired, like they were giving up on the dream of making this place feel like more than it was. I sat in my car for a few minutes, gathering courage and trying to find the right words. How do you tell someone you love that you've achieved something they'd tried to prevent? How do you share good news that feels like betrayal to the person who raised you? Finally, I took a deep breath and walked inside. Mama was in the kitchen, as always, this time making cornbread to go with the leftover red beans from yesterday. She looked up when I came in, and I could see her trying to read my expression. "You look like you got something to say," she observed. "I do." "Good news or bad news? Depends on how you look at it." She set down her mixing spoon and turned to face me fully, her expression guarded but attentive. "Harvard called today," I said. The kitchen went very quiet. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed to pause. "Harvard called?" she repeated slowly. "Yes, ma'am. About what?" I took a breath and jumped off the cliff. "About my acceptance, the one you burned." Her face went through a series of changes. Confusion, understanding, anger, and something that might have been fear. "I thought we settled this," she said carefully. "You settled it." I reapplied. "You what?" "I reapplied to Harvard, Mama." With Ms. Choi's help, I explained what happened to my original acceptance letter, and they extended my deadline. The silence stretched between us like a live wire, dangerous and crackling with potential energy. "And?" she said finally. "And I got in. Again, with a scholarship this time. The Robinson Scholarship for Exceptional Resilience." I watched my mother's face as she processed this information, watched her realize that all her efforts to keep me close had not only failed, but had actually resulted in me receiving more recognition, more funding, more reasons to leave. "How much?" she asked, her voice hollow. $5,000 a year, for 4 years, plus research opportunities. $20,000, she said, like she was calculating the cost of losing me. "Mama," I said, stepping closer, "this is good news. This is everything we've been working toward." "We?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This ain't we, baby girl. This is you, choosing them over us. This is you deciding that everything I gave you wasn't enough. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Her voice was rising now, taking on the edge it got when she was building toward a real fight. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my daughter went behind my back to pursue something I explicitly told her was a bad idea." "You told me it was a bad idea because you were scared," I said, my own voice getting louder. "But being scared doesn't give you the right to destroy my future." "I destroyed your future?" She stepped closer to me, her eyes flashing with anger and hurt. "I destroyed your future by working 3 jobs to keep you fed and clothed and housed? I destroyed your future by making sure you had everything you needed to succeed right here, where people know you and love you. You destroyed my Harvard acceptance letter," I said flatly. "You literally burned it." The words hung in the air between us like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. "I protected you," she said, but her voice was quieter now, less certain. "From what? From opportunities? From education? From the chance to build something better? From disappointment? From failure? From becoming someone who thinks she's too good for where she came from? I would never think that." "Maybe not now," she said, and I could hear the echo of our conversation from weeks earlier. "But what about when you're up there with all them rich kids, realizing how different your life has been? What about when you start feeling ashamed of this place, of us?" "Mama," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle despite the anger bubbling in my chest. "Do you hear yourself? You're so afraid of me leaving that you're willing to sabotage my chances of succeeding. You're so worried about me being ashamed of you that you're giving me actual reasons to resent you." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I raised you," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay me? By going behind my back and choosing strangers over family?" "I'm not choosing strangers over family. I'm choosing my future alongside my family." "Same thing," she said, echoing her words from our earlier fight. "Same damn thing." That's when I knew. Looking at my mother's face, seeing the fear and hurt and stubborn refusal to understand what I was trying to tell her, I knew that this conversation wasn't going to end with hugs and understanding. It was going to end with a choice. Her or Harvard. Family or future. The woman who'd raised me or the woman I was meant to become. And for the first time in my life, I knew which choice I was going to make. The week after I told Mama about Harvard felt like living in a house made of glass, where every conversation carried the potential to shatter everything around us. She wasn't speaking to me directly, but she wasn't giving me the silent treatment either. Instead, she'd developed this way of talking around me, through me, about me without acknowledging my presence in the room. "Darius, tell your sister dinner's ready. Darius, ask your sister if she's working tonight. Darius, let your sister know I'm washing clothes if she has anything that needs cleaning." My little brother was 11 years old and suddenly carrying the weight of being a messenger between 2 adults who were both too stubborn and too hurt to bridge a gap that seemed to grow wider every day. "Can't y'all just talk to each other?" he asked one evening after delivering another indirect communication about household logistics. "This is weird, and it's making my stomach hurt." I was sitting at the kitchen table, working on scholarship, applications for books and computers and other expenses that the Robinson Scholarship didn't cover. Even with Harvard's generous financial aid, there were still costs that added up. Flights to Boston, winter clothes suitable for New England, weather, a laptop that could handle college-level coursework. Sometimes adults have disagreements that take time to work through, I said, not looking up from my applications. This ain't a disagreement, he said with the brutal honesty that 11-year-olds specialize in. This is Mama being mad that you're gonna leave us. From the kitchen, I heard the sharp intake of breath that meant Mama was listening to every word of this conversation. I'm not leaving you, I said, loud enough for her to hear. I'm going to school. There's a difference. Is there? Darius asked, settling into the chair across from me. Because school is in Massachusetts and we're in Louisiana, and that seems pretty far to me. I set down my pen and really looked at my little brother. He'd grown in the past month, shooting up in that way that pre-teenagers do, all suddenly long arms and legs that he hadn't quite figured out how to coordinate yet. But his eyes were older than his years, shadowed with worries that no 11-year-old should have to carry. Come here, I said, pushing my chair back from the table. He came around and leaned against me, still small enough that his head fit perfectly under my chin. I wrapped my arms around him and felt him relax slightly, like he'd been holding tension he didn't know how to release. I'm scared, he whispered, so quietly that Mama couldn't hear from the kitchen. Of what, baby? That you're gonna go away and become one of them smart people who talks different and acts different, and when you come home for Christmas or whatever, you're gonna look at us like we're embarrassing. The words hit me like a physical blow, partly because they echoed Mama's fears so exactly, and partly because I couldn't promise him they weren't true. I didn't know who I was going to become at Harvard. I didn't know how living in a different world would change the way I saw this one. Darius, I said carefully, do you remember when you were scared to start middle school because you thought you might change too much and your friends wouldn't like you anymore? He nodded against my shoulder. What happened? I'm still friends. With Marcus and Jalen. I just got some new friends too. Exactly. Growing up doesn't mean leaving people behind. It means adding new experiences to who you already are. But what if the new experiences are better than the old ones? What if Harvard people are nicer than us, or smarter than us, or just more? I pulled back so I could look at his face. Darius Michael Reddick, you listen to me. There are no people on this earth who are better than you. Smarter in some ways, maybe. Luckier, definitely. But not better. Not more valuable. Not more deserving of love and respect and opportunity. You promise? I promise. And I promise something else too. No matter how many degrees I get, or how many fancy words I learn, or how far away I go to school, you will always be my favorite person to watch cartoons with. You will always be the person whose opinion matters most to me. You will always be my baby brother, and I will always come home to you. He hugged me tighter then, and I felt some of the tension in the house ease slightly. From the kitchen came the sound of Mama moving around, making more noise than necessary with pots and pans, which was her way of processing emotions she didn't want to name. That evening, after Darius had gone to bed and Mama had retreated to her room with a cup of tea and a romance novel, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to figure out how to rebuild the relationship that my success had damaged. Knew she was awake in there, probably staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the ways this Harvard thing could go wrong. I knew she was imagining scenarios where I came home at Christmas speaking differently, dressing differently, looking at our little trailer with new eyes that saw only limitations instead of the love that had sustained us. I also knew that underneath, her anger was grief for her own lost opportunities, fear that my success would somehow highlight her failures, and a desperate love that didn't know how to let go without feeling like abandonment. Around 10 o'clock, I heard her bedroom door open and the soft shuffle of her slippers on the kitchen linoleum. I didn't look up from my applications, but I could feel her presence in the doorway. You still up? She observed. Yes, ma'am. Working on more college stuff? Scholarship applications. For books and supplies. She moved to the sink and started washing dishes that were already clean, her way of staying busy while deciding whether to engage in real conversation. Lot of paperwork for something that's supposed to be free, she said. The tuition is free. Everything else costs money. How much money? I looked up at her then, noting the careful neutrality in her voice. This was the closest thing to normal. Conversation we'd had in a week. Couple $1,000 probably. For books and clothes and a computer. Airplane tickets home. Airplane tickets, she repeated, like the words tasted foreign in her mouth. Yes, ma'am. It's too far to drive for quick visits. She was quiet for a long moment, scrubbing the same plate over and over. How often you planning to come home? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with all the fears and hopes and desperate calculations of a mother trying to figure out how much of her daughter she was about to lose. I don't know, I said honestly. Thanksgiving, probably. Christmas break. Maybe spring break, depending on what's happening with school. Maybe, she said, and I could hear the hurt in that single word. Mama, I said, setting down my pen. I know you're scared. I know this feels like I'm choosing something else over you. But what if we could figure out a way for this to be good for all of us? How's you leaving going to be good for me? Because I won't just be leaving. I'll also be coming back. With new knowledge, new experiences, new ways to help this family and this community. She turned off the water and faced me fully, her expression guarded but attentive. What you mean? I mean, what if I study education at Harvard and come back to Louisiana to teach? What if I use what I learned there to help kids here? What if instead of this being about me escaping, it's about me gathering tools to make things better for people like us? Something flickered across her face. Not quite hope, but not quite dismissal either. You been thinking about that? I've been thinking about a lot of things. About you, mostly. About how you wanted to be a teacher when you were my age. She went very still. How you know about that? This was the moment I'd been building toward for days. The moment when I had to decide whether to reveal what I'd learned about her past or continue protecting her from the pain of her own lost dreams. Ms. Choi and I did some research, I said carefully. We found records, your scholarship to LSU, your nursing school application. The color drained from her face. You had no right. I had every right to understand why the woman who raised me would burn my future in a trash can. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, and I saw her flinch. Mama, I continued, gentler now. I know what you gave up for me. I know you were supposed to go to college, that you were smart enough and good enough and deserving enough. I know you lost that opportunity because you chose to have me instead. And for the first time since finding those ashes in the trash can, that felt like exactly enough. August in Louisiana felt different that year, heavy with endings and beginnings and the particular weight of dreams finally becoming real. I had 2 weeks left before my flight to Boston, and every day felt simultaneously endless and too short, like time had become elastic and unpredictable. My departure preparations had taken over our small trailer in ways that made everyone hyper-aware of what was coming. Boxes of winter clothes that I'd never owned before. Real coats and boots and scarves that seemed impossibly bulky in the humid Louisiana heat. A new laptop computer that Tyree had helped me pick out, funded by a combination of my Robinson scholarship. Money and savings from 2 months of working every available shift at Murphy's Diner. Books. So many books. Not just the ones required for my first semester courses, but additional reading that Ms. Choi had recommended, classics that she insisted would help me hold my own in discussions with students who'd attended elite prep schools and had literary references embedded in their DNA. You're gonna need more than one suitcase, Darius observed, sitting cross-legged on my bed and watching me try to organize everything into manageable piles. I'm gonna need more than 3 suitcases, I said, holding up a wool sweater that looked like it could survive an Arctic expedition. Who knew New England got so cold? Probably everybody who lives in New England. I threw the sweater at him, and he caught it with a grin that was only slightly forced. He'd been trying hard to be enthusiastic about my departure, but I could see the sadness lurking underneath his 12-year-old bravado. "You nervous?" he asked, his voice carefully casual. "Terrified," I admitted. "What if everyone else is smarter than me? What if I can't keep up? What if I get there and realize I don't belong?" "Then you'll figure it out," he said with the simple confidence that only little brothers can manage. "You always figure stuff out." From the kitchen came the sound of Mama cooking dinner. My favorite meal of red beans and rice with cornbread and green beans, a farewell feast that she'd been planning. For weeks, she'd thrown herself into preparation mode with the kind of focused energy that she usually reserved for crisis management, organizing everything from my flight details to care packages she planned to send monthly. It was her way of staying busy, enough that she didn't have to think too hard about what was actually happening. "Imani," she called, "come help me with this cornbread." I found her in the kitchen, standing over a bowl of batter with an expression of fierce concentration. Making cornbread was muscle memory for her. She could do it in her sleep. But tonight, she was measuring ingredients like she was defusing a bomb. "Need me to do anything specific?" I asked. "Just stand here and talk to me while I finish this. I like having you in the kitchen." So I leaned against the counter and watched her work, noting the careful way she was trying to memorize this moment. The afternoon light streaming through our thin curtains, the familiar rhythm of her cooking, the comfortable silence between us that no longer felt strained or fragile. "Got everything you need for the trip?" she asked. "I think so." Ms. Choi made me a checklist that's 3 pages long. "She's been good to you, that teacher." "Yes, ma'am, she has." Mama poured the batter into a cast-iron skillet that had belonged to her mother, one of the few things she'd inherited when her parents died. The skillet was seasoned to perfection, black and smooth, and capable of making cornbread that was crispy on the outside and tender in the middle. "Can I tell you something?" she said, sliding the skillet into the oven. "Always. I've been thinking a lot about when I was your age, about the dreams I had and the choices I made and the person I thought I was going to become." She wiped her hands on her apron and turned to face me, her expression serious but calm. "I was angry for a long time about how things turned out. Angry at circumstances, angry at myself, angry at a world that seemed designed to keep people like us from getting ahead. That anger got all twisted up with my love for you and Darius, until I couldn't tell the difference between protecting y'all and protecting my own hurt feelings. I waited, sensing that she was building toward something important. But these past few weeks, watching you get ready to leave, I've been remembering something I forgot a long time ago." "What's that?" "I've been remembering that I was proud of my dreams back then. Even when they got crushed, even when I had to make different choices, I was proud that I'd wanted something big for myself. I'd forgotten that feeling until I saw it in you." She moved closer, close enough that I could see the tears gathering in her eyes. "I want you to stay proud, baby. No matter what happens up there, no matter how hard it gets or how different it feels, I want you to remember that your dreams are worth being proud of. They're worth fighting for. Mama." "I'm not done," she said, holding up a hand. "I also want you to know that burning that letter was the worst thing I ever did. Not because it was wrong to be scared for you, but because I let my fear make me cruel. I let my own disappointment turn me into someone who would hurt the person I love most in this world. You weren't cruel," I said. "You were scared. Being scared ain't an excuse for being destructive. I know that now." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper that looked official and important. "What's that?" "Application to Delgado Community College. Nursing program. I've been carrying it around for 3 weeks, trying to work up the courage to fill it out." I stared at the paper, understanding flooding through me like warm water. Mama, that's incredible. Maybe. Maybe not. I'm 45 years old, Imani. Been out of school for longer than you've been alive. Might be too old to learn new things. You are not too old. You're never too old to chase your dreams. Even dreams that got deferred for 25 years? Especially dreams that got deferred for 25 years. She unfolded the application and spread it out on the kitchen counter between us. It was thick and intimidating, full of questions about educational background and career goals and financial need. "Would you help me fill it out?" she asked. "After dinner, maybe. I could use someone who knows about this college application stuff." I felt tears gathering in my own eyes then. I would love to help you fill it out. And maybe you could help me write an essay about why I want to be a nurse. I never been good with words the way you are. Mama, you're wonderful with words. You just need to trust yourself. The timer went off for the cornbread, and she moved to pull it from the oven. The smell filled our small kitchen. Familiar and comforting, and exactly like home. "One more thing," she said, setting the hot skillet on the stove. "I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that when you get up there and start meeting all them smart people and learning all them new things, you'll remember that you belong there. Not because you got lucky or because somebody felt sorry for you, but because you earned it. Because you're exactly as smart and capable and deserving as anybody else walking around that campus. I promise. And promise me that if you ever start feeling lost or overwhelmed or like you made a mistake, you'll call home. Not because we expect you to give up, but because sometimes you need people who love you to remind you who you are. I promise that too." Dinner that night felt like a celebration and a wake at the same time. Tyree came over, along with Mrs. Henderson from across the street, and Ms. Choi, who had insisted on bringing dessert, a store-bought cake with "Congratulations, Harvard Girl," written in crimson frosting. We squeezed around our small kitchen table, talking and laughing and carefully not mentioning that this was the last time we'd all be together like this. Darius told elaborate stories about his upcoming 7th grade year. Tyree shared updates on his own college applications. Mrs. Henderson dispensed advice about cold weather and big cities and the importance of calling home regularly. Ms. Choi presented me with a gift, a leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover. "For your first year," she said, "to document everything. The good, the bad, the overwhelming, the extraordinary. Someday you're going to want to remember exactly how this felt. After everyone went home, Mama and I sat at the kitchen table with her nursing school application spread between us. We worked through it question by question, her telling me about her work experience and her reasons for wanting to become a nurse while I helped her translate her thoughts into the formal language. That application's required. Why nursing? I read aloud from the essay prompt. "That's easy," she said. "I've been taking care of people my whole life. My children, my patients at the nursing home, my neighbors when they get sick. But I've been doing it without the training and credentials that would let me do it properly. I want to learn how to help people medically, not just emotionally." "That's beautiful, Mama. Write exactly that." She bent over the paper, writing slowly and carefully in her neat cursive handwriting. Watching her work on her own dreams while mine were about to come true felt like some kind of cosmic balance being restored. "You know what's funny?" she said, not looking up from her essay. "What?" "I spent so much time being afraid that your success would make me feel like a failure. I almost missed seeing that it actually inspired me to try again. I didn't lose nothing," she said fiercely. "I chose you. I chose my family. And that choice was beautiful and generous and cost you everything you'd dreamed of. But Mama, my succeeding doesn't diminish your sacrifice. It honors it." She was crying now, silent tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. "You don't understand," she whispered. You can't understand what it's like to watch your child get everything you ever wanted and know that when she gets it, she won't need you anymore. That's not true, isn't it? When you're up there with all them professors and smart students, when you're learning things I never could teach you, when you're becoming someone I never could have helped you become, how you gonna need me then? I stood up and moved toward her, slowly, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. I will always need you, I said. Not because I'm helpless or limited or unable to take care of myself. I'll need you because you're my mother. Because you're the person who taught me how to be strong and determined and resilient. Because you're the person who showed me that love means working 3 jobs to give your children opportunities you never had. But you won't live here anymore. You won't be my baby anymore. I'll always be your baby. But Mama, I can't stay your baby. I can't limit myself to protect your feelings. That's not fair to either of us. She leaned against the counter, looking suddenly older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. I'm so scared, she admitted. I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared of you being ashamed of us. I'm scared of you forgetting where you came from. And I'm scared too, I said. I'm scared of failing. I'm scared of not being smart enough or strong, enough or ready enough. I'm scared of missing y'all so much that I can't focus on school. But mostly, I'm scared of letting fear make decisions for me the way it's making decisions for you. We stood there in the kitchen for a long moment. Both of us crying, both of us scared, both of us loving each other in ways that felt too big and too complicated for words. If I said I was proud of you, she said finally, if I said I wanted you to go and succeed and become everything you're capable of becoming, would you promise me something? What? Promise me you'll remember that being educated don't make you better than people who ain't. Promise me you'll remember that this family, this place, these people who love you, we're not something to be ashamed of or left behind. I promise. And promise me you'll call home every week. Not because you have to, but because you want to. I promise that too. She moved toward me then, slowly, and pulled me into a hug that felt like forgiveness and grief and letting go all wrapped up together. I'm sorry about the letter, she whispered against my hair. I was wrong to burn it. I was scared and I was wrong. I'm sorry too, I said, for going behind your back, for not trusting you enough to tell you the truth from the beginning. You couldn't trust me, she said. I gave you every reason not to. We held each other in our small kitchen, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of home, while outside the Louisiana night settled around our little trailer like a blanket that was warm and comforting and, for the first time in weeks, big, enough for both of our dreams. 3 days later, I got a call from Tyree Morrison. Heard you got into Harvard, he said without preamble. News travels fast. Darius told Marcus, who told his mama, who told everybody at the grocery store. You know how it is. I did know how it was. In our neighborhood, news spread through the informal network of mothers and children and checkout line conversations, faster than any social media platform ever could. You calling to congratulate me or tell me I'm making a mistake? Bit of both, maybe. I'd been expecting this conversation for weeks. Tyree and I had been friends since middle school, had dated, briefly during sophomore year before deciding we were better as friends, and had maintained a comfortable closeness that felt like family. He was one of the few people my age who understood both my dreams and my loyalty to home. Can I come over? He asked. Think we should talk face to face. An hour later, he was sitting on my front steps, still wearing his work clothes from the auto shop where he'd been learning to be a mechanic since graduating high school the year before. His hands were permanently stained with engine oil, and he smelled like honest work and familiar comfort. So, he said, Harvard. Harvard. You nervous? Terrified. Good. Means it matters to you. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching Mrs. Henderson across the street water her azaleas and listening to the distant sound of music from someone's radio. Can I tell you something? he said finally. Always. I'm proud of you, and I'm gonna miss you like crazy. And I'm scared that when you come back home for Christmas, you're gonna look at all of us. This place, these people, me, and wonder how you ever thought this was enough. It was almost exactly what Darius had said, what Mama had feared, what I'd been trying not to think about. Tyree, I said, you know that's not who I am. I know that's not who you are now. But people change when they go places, Imani. They can't help it. New experiences change how you see old ones. Maybe. But change doesn't have to mean replacement. I can become more without becoming different, you know? He considered this, picking at a loose thread on his work shirt. What if I told you something crazy? He said. Crazier than me going to Harvard? Way crazier. He took a breath. What if I told you I've been thinking about applying to college myself? Maybe start at LSU, study business management, learn how to run a real auto shop instead of just working in someone else's. I stared at him. Are you serious? Been thinking about it for months. Watching you work so hard for your dreams made me realize I got dreams too. Just took me longer to admit they were worth chasing. Tyree, that's amazing. That's incredible. Yeah, well, don't get too excited yet. Still gotta convince my grandmother that I'm not losing my mind, and I gotta figure out how to pay for it. There are scholarships, financial aid, work-study programs. I know. Been doing research. Turns out I'm not as dumb as I thought. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. You were never dumb. You just hadn't found your motivation yet. Maybe not. Or maybe it took watching someone I care about be brave enough to chase impossible things, to realize that impossible is just another word for difficult. We talked for another hour about applications and deadlines, and the specific terror of reaching for things that felt too big for people like us. When he finally left, I felt like something had shifted in the universe. Not just for me, but for everyone around me. Maybe this was what Ms. Choi had meant when she said my success would elevate everyone. Maybe dreams were contagious in the best possible way. That night, I called Harvard's financial aid office to ask about work-study opportunities and summer research programs. I called the Robinson Scholarship Office to inquire about mentorship programs and networking opportunities. I started making lists of everything I needed to do, buy, learn, and prepare for between now and orientation in August. But mostly, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote thank you letters. To Ms. Choi, for believing in me when I couldn't believe, in myself. To Dean Stone, for taking a chance on a complicated student with a complicated story. To the anonymous donors whose contributions had created the Robinson Scholarship. And to Mama, though I never sent that letter. Instead, I kept it in my notebook, next to the fragments of my original acceptance letter and the new letter that would take me to Cambridge in the fall. Dear Mama, it began. Thank you for showing me that love sometimes means holding on, and sometimes means letting go. Thank you for teaching me that being strong doesn't mean never being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Thank you for sacrificing your dreams so I could have mine, and for finally finding the courage to let me chase them. The letter was 3 pages long, full of everything I wanted to say but didn't know how to say aloud. It would stay in my notebook, private and sacred like all the most important words we carry but never speak. In 6 weeks, I would board a plane to Boston. In 6 weeks, I would start becoming the woman I was meant to be. But tonight, I was still Imani Reddick from trailer number 12 on Magnolia Court, daughter of Loretta, sister to Darius, friend to Tyree, student of Ms. Choi. Tonight, I was still exactly who I'd always been, just with a clearer vision of who I was becoming. Maybe that's what dreams are supposed to do, I said. Spread from person to person until everybody's reaching for something better. Maybe so. 2 days later, I was standing in the New Orleans airport with 2 oversized suitcases, a carry-on, bag stuffed with snacks and comfort items, and a family that was trying very hard not to cry. Darius was the first to break. He threw his arms around my waist and buried his face against my shoulder, his 12-year-old composure finally cracking. "I'm gonna miss you so much," he said, his voice muffled by my shirt. "I'm gonna miss you too, baby brother, but I'll call you every Sunday, and I'll be home for Thanksgiving. That's only 3 months away." 3 months is forever. 3 months is nothing. By the time you know it, I'll be back home complaining about how cold Boston is and asking you to catch me up on all the neighborhood gossip. Tyree hugged me next, a long embrace that felt like letting go and holding on at the same time. "Don't forget about us regular people when you get all fancy and educated," he said. "Impossible. Y'all are stuck with me forever." Good. That's how it should be. Mama was last, and her hug lasted the longest. She whispered instructions about eating enough vegetables and calling if I needed anything, and remembering to take my vitamins. But underneath the practical concerns, I could hear her saying other things. "I love you. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." "You got everything?" she asked when we finally pulled apart. "Everything that matters. Call me when you land." "Yes, ma'am." "And Imani?" "Yes, ma'am." Go show them what Louisiana girls are made of. I walked toward my gate with my carry-on bag and my mother's blessing, and a heart that felt too full for my chest to contain. Everything I'd worked for, dreamed of, fought for, was waiting at the other end of a 4-hour flight. Harvard University. The Robinson Scholarship. A dormitory room in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Professors whose names I'd only seen in textbooks. Libraries that held more knowledge than I could absorb in a lifetime. A future that was finally completely, undeniably, mine. But first, I had to get on a plane and fly toward it. The boarding announcement crackled over the airport speakers. "Now boarding all passengers for Delta Flight 1247 to Boston Logan International Airport." I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the woman I was about to become. 6 years later, I'm sitting in my apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts, wearing my Harvard graduation cap and staring at an acceptance letter to Harvard Law School that arrived this morning. It's thick and official, a doorway to 3 more years of elite education, even further from the trailer park in Louisiana where my story began. But this time, no one burned my letter. This time, when I called home, Mama cried with joy instead of fear. "Harvard Law School," she repeated, voice crackling through the phone. "My baby's going to be a lawyer." "If I decide to go," I said. "I'm still thinking about it." "What else would you do?" "Come home. Teach high school in Baton Rouge. Use what I've learned here to help kids like I used to be." There was a pause. "You'd give up law school to come back here?" "I wouldn't be giving it up. I'd be choosing something else. Something that might matter more. For all the opportunities Harvard gave me, brilliant professors, ambitious peers, endless connections, I'd spent 4 years feeling pulled in 2 directions. Part of me thrived on the challenge and prestige, but another part missed home with an ache I couldn't explain. I missed the smell of Mama's cornbread, Darius's laugh, the way Louisiana light hit the live oaks. Most of all, I missed feeling like my life had a purpose beyond my own success. "You know what I think?" Mama said. "I think you should do what makes you feel most like yourself. Law school will be there. But chances to come home and make a difference, those might not wait." That's when I realized how much we'd both grown. Mama had graduated, nursing school at 47, and worked in pediatrics at Baton Rouge General. Her patients adored her. Darius was 18 now, headed to LSU for engineering. Tyree had opened an auto repair shop, married a second-grade teacher, and was building the kind of life we once only dreamed about. Everyone I loved had grown into fuller versions of themselves, and I'd learned that success isn't about how far you run from home. It's about what you carry back. Just then, I got a text from Ms. Choi. "Whatever you decide, remember you have options now because you were brave enough to claim them." That's not a small thing. That's everything. She was right. I'd arrived at Harvard scared and unsure, with dreams but no guarantees. I'd never seen snow. I'd never been in a room where I wasn't automatically the smartest person. And Harvard challenged me, not just academically, but socially and emotionally. I had to navigate conversations with classmates whose parents were CEOs, learn to speak confidently in classrooms led by scholars I once only read about. Sometimes the imposter syndrome was so loud I wanted to quit. But I didn't. I found my voice. I wrote papers that professors praised. I made real friends, people who loved me because of where I came from, not despite it. I learned that growing up in a trailer park wasn't a weakness, it was a kind of superpower. My freshman roommate, raised in Connecticut privilege, once told me, "You're the strongest person I know, not because you got here from Louisiana, but because you got here as yourself." That conversation stayed with me. Now, sitting with my law school letter and a choice that would shape my future, I finally understood what Ms. Choi once meant when she said I had to choose between being a daughter and being a woman. She'd been wrong. I didn't have to choose. I could be both, a woman who graduated from Harvard and a daughter who missed her roots enough to return. I could use my degree in education and African American studies to help students like Darius and Tyree, and the younger me at law school would still be there. But there was a girl in a trailer park who needed someone like me to walk into her AP English class and prove that dreams weren't too big for where she came from. I picked up the phone. "Mama? Hey, baby, you decide about law school yet?" "I did. I'm coming home." A pause. "You sure? That's a big opportunity to turn down." "I'm not turning it down. I'm deferring. There's something I need to do first." "What's that? Remember how you used to say you wanted to be a teacher and change the world one classroom at a time?" "I remember. I think it's time someone in this family got to do that." When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. I had 6 weeks to finish my thesis, graduate, and pack up my life. Then, I was going home to teach. 3 weeks later, I walked across the stage in Harvard Yard to receive my diploma, with Mama, Darius, Tyree, and Ms. Choi cheering in the audience. Mama wore a new navy dress and cried harder than I'd ever seen. We took pictures on the steps of Widener Library, a nurse who graduated at 47, a high school senior with dreams of engineering, a business owner, a mentor, and me, Imani Reddick from trailer number 12, now a Harvard graduate. "You know what the best part of this is?" Mama said as we walked back to the hotel. "You proved that coming back isn't the same as never leaving. Home can be something you carry and something you return to." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Exactly right." 6 months later, I stood in front of my first classroom at Baton Rouge High School. 32 students stared at me, unsure what to expect. "Good morning," I said. "I'm Ms. Reddick, your AP English teacher. Before we dive into literature and essays and college applications, I want to tell you a story." They listened. It's about a girl who grew up not 15 minutes from here. Her mother burned her Harvard acceptance letter because she was scared of losing her. But that girl went anyway. And 6 years later, she graduated from Harvard and came home to teach students like you. I walked to the board and wrote, "Your dreams are not too big. Your circumstances are not too small. Your story is not over. Yet." "This year," I told them, "we'll read books, write essays, prep for college. But more than that, we'll practice believing your dreams are not just possible, but inevitable." A girl in the front raised her hand. "Is that story really true?" "Every word," I said. "And if you want to hear how it ends, you'll have to stick around and find out." The charred fragments of my original Harvard acceptance letter now hang framed on my classroom wall, beside my diploma and a photo of my first graduating class. A reminder that some things can be destroyed and rebuilt stronger. That fear and love often look alike, but only love lets you grow. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do with success is take it home and help someone else begin their story. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.